Welcome to the Versus Men's podcast, where we're having real conversations and stories on faith, manhood, relationships, culture, and everything else in between. These conversations are tough, but we're honestly doing them because we have to become the men of God that He's called us to be. You aren't the only one who's trying to figure out your faith, your marriage, or you're struggling with an addiction. That's why this podcast exists. So thanks for listening, and if you enjoy this content, like, subscribe, and send it to a friend who needs it. Thanks for joining. Welcome back to the Versus Men's podcast. Today's episode features Pike Williams, a counselor at the Refuge Center, as well as the chaplain for the Nashville Predators. Before we get into that, though, we have Versus Men's Night coming up on May 9th, and you're going to want to reserve your tickets now because they are going quick. And Granger Smith is going to be an incredible speaker alongside of Mike Fisher and MLB All-Stars Stephen Wright and Chase Headley. Go to versusmen.com to purchase tickets now. Pike, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
As we get into this, Pike, I've always found that counselors tend to have a personal story, an origin story for why they got into it themselves. And I'd just love to ask you that to start things off.
Yeah, well, we do have a story, don't we? And I think that's the fun part of life, if we can get to it, is to hear the journey that we've all been on. And for me, yeah, I do have a story to getting into. So, you know, I didn't realize it until much later, but the journey started when I came to realize that my mother had become an alcoholic. There were a few cracks in our home. My youngest years were really good, best I could tell. But then by the time I became around 13 or 14 years of age, I became aware that there were some real problems. There were some examples or some manifestations of physical violence in the home. And then as a couple more years went by, my brother and I would be awakened in the night with screaming and yelling, and it was particularly difficult. And so alcoholism came to be a huge issue, and all that went with that. My parents ultimately divorced when I was 18. I was a freshman in college at the time. And something happened then that was really impacted me, and I didn't realize it until many years later. And honestly, when I was in college, I thought, okay, the alcoholism was bad, but that's behind me. It really hasn't fazed me. I'm good. And that found out later that wasn't true. But then when I got to college and my dad was paying the bills, supposedly I had a moment where I had paid my tuition, paid the dorm. I'd written checks back in the day when you wrote checks. I wrote checks, and I got a call from the office saying all these checks had bounced. And I was embarrassed and shocked and surprised because there was no clue that finances were a problem. And I called my dad, and he finally fessed up that he was out of money. And so I was kind of on my own financially. And it was a shock to me, and I had to, of course, get a job and hustle. And that was in the day, honestly, if you hustled and worked hard, you could sort of work your way through college. And I was able to get a scholarship that helped and a grant that helped, and I worked and made it through. But I'm not sure that's even feasible nowadays for people to do that. But nonetheless, what that set up in me, though, and I found out later, was sort of this scarcity mentality, that feeling like I don't know, and I wonder if this didn't inform my sixness on the Enneagram. Sixes are often characterized with fear, this idea, I'm afraid that that something is going to happen and I need to make sure this doesn't happen, kind of thing. And so I wonder if that didn't affect me in that way. So there's that. But we went on through college, and then when I became a Christian, or I invited Christ into my life through Young Life when I was about 15. And through high school, everything was pretty smooth, and I was kind of walking the walk. But I got to college and discovered beer and wine and partying and women, and went off the rails and developed very quickly two sets of friends. I had my Christian friends, and then I had my partying friends, and never the twain shall meet.
Yep. And you hope they don't interact.
Yeah. And I worked really hard to make sure that didn't happen. And so I learned to be deceptive and to live a duplicitous life, I got this going on over here and this going on over here. And it was a way for me to hide and also to medicate. Again, I didn't realize any of this until much later. that this was my coping strategy with some of the pain I was dealing with. And then I met my wife, and this was a very interesting time in my life. I had proposed, and we were getting married, and we had a date. I had been transferred to Omaha, Nebraska. She was still living in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was out there by myself. So I go to this church, just pick it out of, then we had the yellow pages. Picked out the yellow pages, went to this
What are
church.
those?
Yeah, I'll tell you later. But found it and stumbled in there. And I swear it felt like every Sunday, it felt like the message was the same. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. No man can serve two masters, for he'll love the one and hate the other. I wish you were hot or cold, but you're lukewarm. It just seemed that God was just hammering on me to say, I know what you're doing. You know what you're doing. And here's the kicker. And this is where God brought a couple of men into my life. And I don't think they realized how God used them. But they began asking me questions about my life, which I needed someone to ask me. Because by now, my dad had become an alcoholic at this stage of my life. I was in my early 20s, and they were asking me questions, which was very helpful. But the question that God was asking me is, Leslie thinks she's getting the Christian version of you. It's time for you to decide, who are you? And if you're not going to be that, you just need to tell her that and let that be known. Or if you're going to be that, you need to be that. But I really felt like, in a loving way, but in a very clear way, God was saying, it's time to decide. And I love that. And but these men were so helpful because they asked me questions about my relationship with my dad. I was way overly bonded with my dad, and he had power over me that he shouldn't have had, meaning through my mother's alcoholism, he became the sort of the hero, and he became the person I defended. And so he kind of parlayed that into, as he started struggling, he kind of parlayed my relationship into something he could use to keep himself afloat. I would loan him money. I leased a car for him, and I was propping him up. And so that wasn't going to work well in my marriage to keep that a secret to my wife. So all of that, those two men entering my life, as the years went by, and I was with the Procter & Gamble company, was an engineer by education, was there for 34 years doing supply chain work. But along the way, I began to realize the alcoholism had affected me. I had learned how to hide and deceive and lie. You know, if you're in the home of an addiction, one of the things you get really good at is lying. And I was really good at it. And, you know, when you say, I'm going to follow Jesus, Jesus is all about the truth. So there's this real not having that, you know, not in my house. It's not going to work, Williams. So, but I love that. It comes with so much love and grace, but brought people into my life at different times. And so I began to realize, boy, if someday, if I could ever have a chance to walk with other people who are going through some of what I've been through, it would be an honor. But, you know, the golden handcuffs are the golden handcuffs. And by now we were married with children, and I just I didn't feel like I could walk away from my job. And so finally, when I retired, I was able to retire when I was 55, retired. I went back here to Trevecca and got my degree in counseling. And so I've been doing this now for the last 10 years. But that's kind of what led me into it. And it was really born out of kind of the mistakes, the pain, the scars, the hurt. But, you know, God is such a redeemer. And he has really been showing me, I'm going to show you how we're going to redeem this in my life. And hopefully I can be an encouragement to others, you know, at this stage of my life doing this work. So I'm just
and what I love about you, Pike, is you're a warm presence, that you are a safe person because you're confident in who you are, with your boundaries, with even talking through the nature of you being deceptive was you may be lying to your wife, to yourself, but there's acknowledgement, especially now. I was not deceiving God. And the steps of maturity were first acknowledging, here's how I'm being deceptive. And then even your own story of bringing it home to the real step of maturity is obviously acknowledging it to God, to your wife, and then bringing the realness of who you actually are before others, including friends. And that's why I think when you sit in a room with you, there's that, you've been there. You know exactly where, when you're in a group of chairs in a circle, there's trust that you were there too.
Yeah, indeed. And as I said, I've got the scar tissue to show for it. And yet none of it's wasted. And this is the amazing thing about God. No matter the pain we've been through, he's not finished. And things that the adversary means for evil, God has a way of capturing that and redeeming it and using it for His glory and His purposes and our good. And so, yeah, it's kind of crazy. So,
And I love how you've emphasized, like, in group time and privately,
mhm,
for me, of even hearing your story with your family dynamics,
mhm,
always recommending to me, John, in both sets of your parents,
mhm,
there is both good
mhm.
and bad.
Yeah.
There is strengths and there is
Yes.
weaknesses.
Yes.
A part of the healing
Yes.
journey as you growing up, you have to acknowledge both sides of that.
You do indeed.
You can have an A+
Yeah.
dad in one sphere of him and his
Yes.
fatherhood,
Yes.
while he completely failed in another.
Yes.
And that's okay.
Yes.
And that's making him human.
Yes.
And you have to love and accept him for who he is in all the scorecards of his life.
Yeah.
Same thing with on your mom. And so that's something that you've modeled, I think, in your own story as you share that. There's no, it doesn't come across as bitter. It comes across as these were real people with real issues,
Yeah.
and I was a part of their story in this way.
Yeah.
And here's how I've learned from it.
Yeah.
How did you become the chaplain of the Predators? That had to be an interesting story behind it.
It's a story. It's kind of one of those things that came to me, and isn't it fascinating how God does this stuff? So I never played hockey, never was a hockey fan, didn't know anything about hockey until we had our son. He began playing roller hockey when we lived in Cincinnati. I loved it. He began playing ice hockey, loved that. And so when he was just a little boy, like I think maybe 8 years of age, he wanted to go to this hockey camp. It was a Christian hockey camp, which is kind of an oxymoron, it seemed like to me anyway, but in Chicago. And so we took him there, and it was put on by an organization called Hockey Ministries International. They're based in Montreal, and it was just a great experience for him, and we thought this was awesome. And so he went again the next year, and then when we were transferred overseas to Prague, they actually were running camps over in Europe as well. So we got to know the people of Hockey Ministries International a little bit just through that, especially when they came over to Prague. We just helped them kind of get from the airport to where they were doing the camp and stuff. So we got to know the leaders a little bit. Then when I was getting transferred back from Prague to Nashville, that was concurrent with some things that were transpiring with the Predators, where they had some players expressed interest in a chapel program. The NHL is different than other professional leagues, meaning this part of the league is not as it hasn't been going as long as maybe in the NFL or Major League Baseball or the NBA. So it is a league made up mostly of Europeans and Canadians, and so that impacts that to some degree. So it's not been as frequently experienced in the NHL level. So, but some players asked for that, and so the general manager said, "Sure, we'll support that." Then they turned to Hockey Ministries International, and Hockey Ministries turned to me, and they said, "Hey, we think you're the right person to do this." And I'm like, "I am not the right person to do this. I don't know anything about hockey, and I don't know anything about really professional sports other than what I see on television. And I wish I were a professional athlete, but that's never going to happen." So they said, "Well, here's the deal. It may surprise you. They don't need you to know anything about hockey. It's not about what you know about hockey." And I said, "Well, okay, I can understand that. But still, that's not my wheelhouse. That is not a world I've been in." And the long and short of it, they said—
Probably a strength of it.
Well, that's what they said. They said, "It's probably going to help you. And would you pray about it?" And, anytime somebody says that, run, because you're going to get stuck maybe. But no, it was really good. But they said, truly, it's better that, because here's the deal. And I'm just so everybody understands this, I'm there as a volunteer. I'm not a member of the Nashville Predators staff. I don't get tickets to games. I don't get paid. It's something that I'm honored to do, and I love doing it. And I've done it for a long time now. But I'm not there for autographs or tickets or hockey sticks or anything like that, because they have enough people in their lives asking for stuff. And so that's a real important piece of it. So they said, it's better that what you need to do is go in there and have the chapel and then leave. And of course, over time, build relationships and show love and care for them just like you would anyone. So the long and short of it is I ended up saying yes to that. That's how it happened.
Yeah, that's incredible. When men come into your office, this is a very broad level question, but what are the most common issues that guys are walking into your office with?
Well, I think frequently Men are struggling, probably no surprise, with how to integrate what they're showing to the world around them with what's really happening inside, we can say in their soul, this place of their thoughts and feelings and desires and choices and hopes. But it's that part of them, the soul, where unless they share it, no one is going to know about it. And so it is the idea of congruency, and to the degree, or using clinical language, dissonance, to the extent that I'm faking it or showing one thing when in reality I'm sad or I'm hurting or I'm angry. But I can't say that right now, for any whatever reason. And there's good reasons that people don't feel safe to do that. But to the degree that there's that kind of dissonance, it sets up the dynamics for problems. And anxiety is one of the most frequent things people come in with, men come in with, and it manifests itself. Anxiety, it feels like I need to control things. And I don't feel in control, so I'm anxious. I can't seem to get control of this situation, whether it's how we're raising children or how my job is going or things that are clearly outside my control. Sometimes it shows up as just I can't sleep. I can't get a certain thought off my mind, so obsessing over something. Just think about this over and over. I just rewind the tape and rewind the tape and rewind the tape, and those kind of things are manifestations of anxiety. And of course, it can affect our sleep. And then there's a compounding effect is when we
Vicious
can't rest.
cycle.
Yeah. Depression is also a common presenting symptom. Now, there's depression that's caused by our body chemistry being out of whack. A postpartum mother would be a good example of that. But men as well can have chemical imbalances in their bodies that need some medical attention. But frequently, and more frequently, I would say people experience depression because something is wrong. Again, this dissonance is causing them to feel like, I've lost a dream. I've lost something, a hope, a vision for my life. It's not going to happen. I'm never going to get to be the CEO, or I'm never going to be a father, and so that leads us into grief and loss, and depression can be a part of that journey, or unresolved anger. So men, and we see at the Refuge Center for Counseling, we see a lot of men presenting. We may not know this in session one because they're kind of exploring, is this a safe place? But at some point, they will share something in their past that's either happened to them or it was withheld from them, something they really needed, or they were present when something horrible happened. And it has created in them some unfair beliefs or irrational beliefs about themselves. And so that depression can be manifesting as unresolved anger. In other words, I'm angry, this should have never happened, and my inability or the lack of opportunity to talk about that is I'll just go it alone. I'll just stuff it, and I'll suffer in silence.
Is that why many men probably come into your office and what they believe they're initially going for tends to be something very different?
It can happen for sure, definitely. And it's understandable. It's not that they're coming in trying to deceive or be deceptive. There's always a question mark, and especially with men, that can I trust this person? Are they really safe? And to the extent that they realize that they're with a counselor who can hold whatever they want to share and will not judge them for it, will not criticize them for it, just let it be. And we'll talk about maybe some healthier alternatives they could consider if it comes to that. But to the degree that they feel safe, they may come to realize I've been holding a lot of things down and I need to let this breathe a little bit or bring these up and put them on the table. Yeah.
And that's what's so fascinating, that we know legally going into counseling that our counselor cannot share this, and yet we still tend to hold back out of our almost out of our own insecurity. And so how much of your work is actually helping them interpret their own emotions, their own feelings, their own story of origin to understand how it's impacting them now?
Oh, it's really good. As a therapist, as a counselor, or as a chaplain, or in any kind of a role where you care about other people and you are trying to help them trust in that, it takes time. So you have to have reasonable expectations around that. You need to allow some time for joining or connecting and be real as a human. It's so important. Therapists or counselors are just people too, and no better than the person we're talking to. In fact, I find all the time I am learning more from my clients than I'm ever bringing to the party.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like, and I'm grateful for that. But creating a safe place, it takes time and effort. And I think that people frequently have not had that experience. They've had promises of that, suggestions of that, people who are supposed to be safe. And so you have to be mindful as a therapist or anyone in a position who's trying to care for another that people have been hurt before. And so, just allow for that. And here's the thing, we talk about this a lot. Whatever we notice or we feel like is happening in the dynamic between us, like if I feel like you're holding back, or if I feel like there's something about me that may be off-putting to you, perhaps, or some reason, something's in the room and I can just kind of feel it, then to bring it into the room. So let me just ask you, what's it like to be with me? We've been together a few sessions. I've asked you about something and it seems like you didn't want to talk about that very much. That's fine. I respect that. I'm just curious, is there anything I'm doing or is there a way you're experiencing me right now that's making it difficult? And feel free to say it. Maybe I'm reminding you of an uncle that hurt you or a coach or who knows. But just allowing for that, going back to your point about what's happening in your body right now and in your mind, there's something that I may remind you of someone who has hurt you. I may, and I've certainly done this, may be over-responding, if I can say it that way. In other words, I'm being activated. Something is being triggered in me because this person, they're acting like they're safe, but it's kind of reminded me of someone who hurt me. And to the degree that we can talk about it, it's like, let's take the monster out from under the bed. Let's see what it looks like, really,
Yep. You're helping it in many ways bring to the surface what so many guys have probably chosen to stuff down and the reasons behind even stuffing it down.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious,
Yeah.
One of the things in moving here, maybe it's a West Coast thing, but I've always looked at counseling as maintenance for our marriage, for personal. It's a healthy thing to do. It's not a crisis thing to do. But I wonder as I've come here to Nashville, it seems like there's a balance, a mix of feelings. But what would be like on your workload? How many of them are crisis cases versus maintenance? And does that interpretation of counseling come into your work at Refuge Center, even on the Predators with the players? Like, I'm only going to Pike when things are falling apart.
Yeah, I think the crisis, crisis is a word we kind of probably have to define a little bit. Sometimes we do see people in crisis. They come in, I'm going to use the word dysregulated, simply to describe a state where I am stirred up, hypervigilant, defensive. I am really I'm not thinking clearly right now. I'm just in a very much a defensive, protective mode. I'm anxious. And so sometimes people come in, and if that's the case, we're going to try to stabilize them with first of all, some healthy grounding techniques, breathing, just some things to help them calm down. Sometimes that's not enough, and they need medication. And then if that's the case, we have places we can help them get that. We like to talk about medication as a bridge to get to the other side, or temporary, like a flotation device to help keep your head above water. But sometimes people do need a higher level of care. And sometimes people come in and they express suicidal thoughts, and we end up needing to kind of explore that and help them get the help they need to save their life. So crises do come. And we sometimes have to refer them to a higher level of care. The next level up would be people who come in and they may be active in some kind of addiction. They may not be calling it an addiction, but they're coming in high or they're coming in very distracted. You can tell that they may not be high on a drug, but maybe they're thinking about a sexual acting out or pornography, or they're in some kind of a sexual fantasy, or they're thinking about some other part of their life that's out of control, that they're kind of fantasizing. They're sort of with you, but they're not with you. They're present, but they're not present. And you can kind of pick up on that. And so in cases like that, we do have people who can help them with that. We also will refer them to get some additional help. Sometimes we'll talk in terms of, I'm willing to be one person around your table to get help, your support table, but not the only person. So if a person presents with an eating disorder, and men struggle with that, I'm willing to be a part of your team, but not the only member of your team. Because if you're anorexic, this is dangerous, and we need to have a doctor on the team, maybe a dietitian or nutritionist, and I need a release to be able to speak with them, please, so that we can make sure you're okay. So that could be an example of sort of crisis. Other people, though, crisis could be termed as, I'm here because my wife said if I didn't come, she's out. And that for that person, it's a crisis. Now, frequently, people will present with, their first move is not to say that. They'll say, well, we've had a few little problems and not a big deal. I'm just here, to work on a few little things. And you mentioned this earlier, progressively, men, to the degree that they feel safer, then they will ultimately open up a bit more, and they'll say, well, actually, it's a lot worse than what I first said, And so that's very normal. Most men come to counseling, professional counseling, when something has happened that's really, really significant. It may be a memory from the past, a past trauma. I can't keep this down anymore. It's coming up, and I know it is. Or it could be something has happened between them and a person they love.
Emotional affair, physical,
yes,
loss of job.
Yes, my wife just discovered my affair, or loss of job, or a loved one. My father just died, and he was just my rock. So the question that is often asked is, what brings you into counseling now? Like, why not 6 months ago? Why not 6 months from now? Now, there are people, John, as you say, who come in, I've had an experience with counseling before, and we love this and really advocate for this, which is if we could think of mental and emotional health in the same way we think of our physical health, it's really great because we do budget for health, gym memberships and to work out, and we buy clothes for that, and we spend money for trainers, and we invest physically. But when it comes to our inner world, our soul, which is so important because it's our soul, which is where our thoughts and emotions reside, that's telling our body what to do. And so to the extent that our soul is healthy, then we're going to find it a lot easier to act healthy, okay, and do those things that are going to ultimately lead us to where we want to be with our lives.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense, especially once you start hearing, you need to take care of your mental health, physical health, spiritual health equally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's seasons where you're going to prioritize one over the other,
Mm-hmm.
but they're all succinct in a way that if one's going haywire, you're going to find something else in the other sphere of your life going the same direction.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to holistically look at someone's life. And it may be, someone's going through a season of depression. Of course, meds may be on the table, counseling, but so is working out. You have to consider everything and how you're treating someone. And that's what I love about your guys' approach. So when you have different worlds, almost like the everyday guy coming in,
Mm-hmm.
but then you show up at the Bridgestone Arena and you have
Mm-hmm.
players. I'm sure that most people probably assume there's a different level of problems for each sphere in your life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I would almost say, like, in getting to know you more, that something tells me that you're going to say, actually, they're going through a lot of the same problems. Is that true, or am I wrong?
It is true. Okay. It is true. It is very true, and and I think once you get past the glitter and you get to know these men, you find that they're young men who are thinking about the same kind of things that all men think about. Their work is very important to them, obviously. They're under high pressure to perform, or they're out. As Tom Brady said, he was asked once about which is the best Super Bowl that you've won, and he said the next one. So there's a sense in which you're only as good as what you do at the next game, And so they're under tremendous pressure. There's a lot of competition. And the difficulties that they face sometimes are rooted in they have more money than they've ever had. They have a lot of people who want to make themselves available to them than they've ever had. Some of those people can be healthy, safe people, but of course many of them are not, and they're looking to take advantage of them in some way. It's not unusual for men to wonder, okay, these are young men. They're looking to maybe find the right person to marry, but does she really want me, or does she want this, the glitz? Is it, and how do I know? How could I tell? Will she really want me after hockey, for example? So those are all the same kind of questions that men, if we're honest, we would say, the same kind of things. So yeah, there really is. Their pressures are different because it is so intense, and they do have access, and it takes a great deal of discipline and accountability and support to kind of keep things, where they want them to be. Traveling a lot out of town on the road takes us out of our normal routines that can be so helpful to us sometimes. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And that's one of those things that if things are not going well, it's publicly not going well. And that creates your own fear and failure as well.
Yeah.
One of the commonalities I would expect is that whether you're a professional athlete or you are just a young dad putting in the hours at work, it seems like more guys than ever are struggling with work-life balance, ruminating about work to a point that it's almost as if traditionally, God, family, work, that it seems like work has been elevated to the point of, well, for me to supply these goods for my family, I have to ruminate about work. I always have to be. It's Tom Brady. I'm only as good as tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so the guys coming into your office, how common is that? And what would you recommend for guys who are listening that, I would assume most of us are struggling with work-life balance.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great point. And you mentioned something earlier, and this plays right into that as well. So let me just kind of maybe use this to give us some context here. The stages of life that we go through. Talking about the hockey players, they're in a stage of life, many of them I'm a young man, single, and I'm in this stage of life where maybe this is the first time I've been at this stage where I've been on my own. Freedom. And so then we get married, and then we're married with children, and then we're married with adolescent children, and then we're married with adult children, and then somewhere down the line, the nest is empty, and all these different stages of life. And so men come in frequently feeling conflicted at these nodes or these change points. So it's like we just got married and things aren't going well, and I'm struggling to balance. I used to just do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it, and I like playing golf, 12 hours a week. And my wife is pushing back on that, and I don't like that. And so I'm trying to, quote, balance this, or children can do the same thing. So the idea of how do I balance it, it really does ultimately lead to a conversation of priority setting, because we don't always only work on priority number one, but we don't want to lose sight of priority number one. Does that make sense? That if we lose sight of priority number one, then it's no longer priority number one. That it's not unlike, I think, in our spiritual world or our relationship with Christ, that we're reminded not to be double-minded. A particular verse that has meant so much to me lately is Psalm 86:11. Give me an undivided heart so that I might fear your name, as contrasted with fearing other names. In other words, where am I really, what is my first priority spiritually? Is it you, Lord? Or is it really my money? Or is it really my job? Or what other, quote unquote, or little lowercase God am I bowing to? So the idea of what is my priority here? And so if I say my priority is my wife, humanly speaking, let's say in terms of human relationships, I may need to talk with her about, hey, the next 4 days are going to be a blitz. I've got this coming and that coming, and I want to make sure you're going to be okay, because I'm going to kind of have to have my head down. And so we're trying to balance it, if you can use that word. I got to balance my work pressure while also caring for my priority. Now, if the lid blows off, and so in the middle of the 4 days, if I can use this example, and something happens, and I'm going to have to make a decision of I can't show up tomorrow because my wife needs me, this becomes the crunch point and ultimately a defining moment in the relationship. Because the question that we all ask, whether we overtly ask it or not, is, would he sacrifice for me? Would she sacrifice for me? And it's in those points, and I have fumbled the ball so many times right there. And so it's not about never fumbling the ball. It's about when you do fumble the ball, be strong enough, humble enough to say, I fumbled the ball, and would you forgive me? And modeling that, because you are my priority, and I realized in this moment I didn't act like you were. And it's a both. It can be a both and, meaning you're my priority, and I've got to get this done. And are we okay? Do you have what you need? And just checking in. So we talk about that a lot in counseling.
I remember you telling me the advice of, like, every day when you're checking in with your wife, and I think we had it was a few months after moving to Nashville.
Yeah.
Things are busy.
Yeah.
it's chaos. We have 2 young kids.
Yep.
And the important step of before you're turning on Netflix, before you're turning on whatever, sit down on the couch and just ask, how are you today? And use emotional
Yes.
language.
Yes.
Today I was frustrated. Today I did not feel at peace because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And then to communicate that.
Yeah.
Because even through work-life balance, more than half of it can often be not communicating can be the most hurtful thing.
Yeah.
Because then you build up false expectations for your wife or for yourself on what you can even do that day.
Yeah.
And communication is such a huge piece, a part of defusing the situation.
Oh, that's so important, John, what you're saying, which is communicate. So sometimes we come through the door, and you've also teed up something super important, which is the transition. I'm coming home now.
Yes. Yeah.
Hey, I've got to change suits. I've got to take my red cape off and be a husband and put on a different cape. But I've got to be an honest, truthful, loving husband to my wife now. And this is a whole different skill set. It's a whole different way of being. And I didn't need to be a husband at work, but boy, I sure need to be a husband now. And so making that transition, and again, it's not about doing this perfectly, but just acknowledging I need to make the switch. And sometimes we come in the door and we're out of gas, and she really needs to talk. And it's fair to say, I really want to talk to you. I want to hear all about it. But can I just get a drink of water and let me just grab something to eat and give me just 5 minutes? Okay, just give me 5 minutes because I had a heck of a day too, and just something happened right before I left work. So what we have here are 2 people in need, both with whose tanks are kind of empty, and both needing to be cared for and to care for one another. And that can be navigated, and we can do it if we communicate it and say it. So give me just a minute, and then let's sit down and talk, and then do it. And then, as you said, when it's your turn and she says, so how was your day? Now, this is the crux of it. If we fake it and say, it's okay.
It was fine.
Yeah, it's fine. She just looks at us and like, I know better. And why are you lying to me? Now, she may not say that. She probably won't say that.
Well, she'll be thinking it.
But she'll be thinking it. And she'll be thinking, I want to know. I care. And so.
Is it often loving to say, like when you're asking her, say you haven't transitioned well to home, to say, I'm actually thinking about work right now, and I'm trying to be in the space of hearing you.
Yep.
But right now I just can't.
Yes.
Is that okay to say?
Yeah, it's really important to say and to normalize that. Yeah. To make this is one of our tools as we think about relationships, which is I need a little time out. Give me just a time out. And there will be a time in, I promise you. Problems occur when all we get are timeouts. That's all I get from you are timeouts. And there's never a time in, or it just gets swept under the rug, and we never look under the rug. So if we can set up a behavior pattern of I need a timeout and there will be a time in, and let that be true, that is so helpful. Because the truth is, if either one of us are dysregulated, this idea of I am fully defensive, I am feeling threatened, and it may be nothing that you did, but I'm feeling threatened by something that was said to me at work today. So my adrenaline is firing. I am not thinking well because the blood flow literally in our brain shifts from the thoughtful reasoning part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, where we can really listen well and ask thoughtful questions and be really present. The blood shifts from that part of the brain to the limbic part of the brain, where our emotions reside and where our fight or flight response kicks in. And so truly, I come in the door and I'm ready to fight or flight. And this is not a good time. Give me a minute, please, or 5 or 30, or it may be tomorrow before we can actually talk about the budget or whatever the hard subject is, But recognizing that's normal. It doesn't mean one of us is wrong or messed up. But again, communicating about that in a way that's transparent.
No, I think that's really helpful, and just even expressing the language of what is deregulation, and because I think it helps self-awareness as you go into that conversation. And I mean, I try to use personal examples on this podcast just because I think it relates. But I can even remember walking in to a conversation with Kristen where the safer I felt I could go with it was, Kristen, I'm not in the headspace that I'm actually hearing you because I don't think you'll ever leave me. but I know that if I don't send this email or if I don't get this done, I may feel internal guilt or have an email waiting of, John, weren't you supposed to do that?
Yeah.
And that is where you have to do that deep hard work of realizing, well, that you're actually putting that lower G God of work above your spouse. And of course, the safety of knowing that they aren't going to leave you. But you can absolutely exploit that of that security.
Yeah.
And do you think that men,
Sure.
I'm sure I'm not alone in having implicitly acted that way.
No, that's so right. And that is common, and I've certainly done that. And, you know, it's just interesting the things that can take us out of the priority of the relationship. It can be work. It can also be our financial stress. This is a true story for me. This is pretty fresh, meaning in the last few months, my wife is going through some physical struggles with Lyme's disease. She's kind of struggling with that a lot, and then some other things. And as she's been going through that, I've been present with her sort of at a surface level, and I'm just realizing this, that, and if I'm really honest here, and as I have been, and it's funny how the Lord helps expose these things, isn't it? But as I sat with that, came to realize that I was more thinking about what's this going to cost us, that the treatments, and a little bit dismissive of, you'll be okay, it's going to be all right. You know, you're not going to die. And I'm not saying this, of course.
It's the posture you may be taking.
That's right. And the body language is all too visible. And my wife is all too discerning. Okay, I mean that in the best way. She's very discerning, as most of our wives are, if not all of them. And people who love us, they know us, they care, and they've got to know us. And so I've really had to acknowledge that and get closer and intentional about that and admit, you know, kind of the truth. And it is freeing to bring the truth into the conversation, because it does create a sense of, okay, everything's transparent, and it feels, the word intimacy starts to come into view, not sexual intimacy necessarily, but into me see this sense of, okay, you've got my back, I've got your back, this sense of closeness, this sense of you're my best friend. I really feel that now. I know you say it, but when you come clean with me like that, Pike, it feels like it. It feels like you're my best friend, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so there's real power in this. But see, this is just the opposite of what the world says, right? Francis Chan just did a message, and one of the things he made, the point he made along the way, is that the world kind of says, hide your sin, don't tell anybody, and trumpet or broadcast your successes. The Bible seems to say just the opposite. The Bible seems to say, tell people what's not going well. You know, this idea of sin being you're missing the mark. Okay, tell people that. Safe people, trustworthy people, to be sure, but confess your sins and do your good deeds privately. Okay, and it's just the opposite. But it's very interesting, the different outcome that occurs when we do that.
Yeah, whether you call it lead with a limp or weakness is the way, there's a lot of slogans for it, right?
Yeah.
But I think that here at Verses on the podcast, that's exactly what we're meaning by, that's what we're calling men to in many ways, because I think men struggle with identifying their weaknesses a lot of time, because we tend to just focus on our strengths to almost counterbalance our weaknesses. But where we find God moving the most is in those weaknesses.
Yeah.
It's in the parts of us that maybe we're just not even self-aware enough that we're realizing that there's a wound there that we're acting out of.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason for a podcast like this is, how do we have a guy like you on Pike to even make us wrestle through, what am I hiding?
Yeah.
What have I not looked at for a really long time in my own life, and taking an inventory of that? And guys, we're going to be concluding part 1 right now of our time with Pike. And we will be rejoining the conversation next week as we head into some more general men's counseling and asking specific questions that you guys may be asking yourself on men's issues. Thanks for joining.